Hello everyone, this is Fantasy Audiobook. Here you find original fan made audio stories.
Myth. I spread divine seeds in Greek mythology. Part 2. Hephaestus looked just like Fan Jin after passing the imperial examination, crazed and unable to hear a word anyone said. Prince Hephaestus. Ha, ha, ha. Prince Hephaestus. Ha, ha, ha. Prince Hephaestus. Ha, ha, ha. Slap. Sorafine slapped Hephaestus right across his handsome face. Prince Hephaestus, pull yourself together. It hurts. It's not a dream. Hephaestus laughed again. Sorafine wondered if he had accidentally cut away Hephaestus's intelligence, as he had become so crazed. Ah, thank you for your help. Sorafine, without you, I would still be an ugly blacksmith god. A ray of light shone in Hephaestus's eyes, filled with hope. No, Prince Hephaestus, you should thank that version of yourself who didn't give up, the one who was able to grasp change. Sorafine said slowly, countless gods would not have had the patience to listen to what I had to say if they had encountered the same predicament as you. Sorafine was quite surprised by a god like Hephaestus. Before meeting him, he had planned for a long stay, but he hadn't expected Hephaestus to be so easy to talk to. Hearing Sorafine's words, Hephaestus's inner fire began to circulate, and a trace of surprise flashed in those fire-red eyes that were as vibrant as the most brilliant roses. At this moment, Aphrodite, who was heading towards the lands below, suddenly froze. As she gripped the power in her hands, a new force infused her body. She muttered to herself, love of friendship. What kind of power is this? How strange. At this moment, Hephaestus leaned against the fiery red forge, the scorching firelight casting well-defined contours upon the face that Sorafine had sculpted. That profile seemed to be gilded with a layer of warm gold, yet it could not dispel the shadows settled deep within his eyes. He ran his long, slender fingers over this handsome face and let out a deep sigh. The leaping flames in the forge crackled and popped, as if accompanying his suppressed sigh, forcing the churning pain in his chest up to his throat bit by bit. Prince Sorafini, he began. His voice carried the scorching heat of fire and the warmth of iron, yet it hid an imperceptible tremor. His gaze looked through the endless volcanoes toward the fields where Sorafine had sown his seed. Even in the deep of night, that place exuded rich vitality and was blooming with beautiful flowers. It felt like two different worlds compared to his own temple, which was filled with magma and darkness. In the past, I was immersed in forging every moment, hoping to forge the hardest armor in the world to protect myself, wanting to design the most brilliant jewelry to make myself beautiful. But the harder the armor, the more fragile I appeared, the more brilliant the jewelry, the uglier I looked. In the end, I discovered that my heart had become a joke. Hephaestus began to tell his story. He raised his hand, pointing there, and said, there were thick calluses once caused by the influence of various laws, as well as scars from being burned by flames when forging artifacts that should not have been forged. Back then, I comforted myself by saying those scars were my medals as the fire god, but later I discovered they had become the very things I was mocked for. The first time I saw you, a feeling of jealousy grew in my heart. Why were you so handsome? Your face looked as if it had been meticulously carved by the world. Your body was perfect, a fraction less would be frail, a fraction more would be rugged. You are gentle as jade, mastering the sprouting of seed. Wherever you walk, vegetation grows and flowers bloom. But I was born with an ugly shell. My body was once thrown down from Mount Olympus, leaving behind an indelible disability. Even my fingertips are stained with forge ash that can never be washed away. Watching you lean down to kiss the newborn sprouts, watching you awaken sleeping seed with your gentle breath, a burning pain surged in my heart. It was the cowardice of longing to touch but not daring to reach out, the agony of knowing the chasm was hard to cross yet being unable to stop myself from sinking into it. Hephaestus continued, I even had a terrible thought in my heart, to submerge you in eternal magma, watching the terrifying temperature burn your skin, which is like mud and fat jade, over and over again. To listen to your screams, which sound like mountain springs, and watch your skin fester and regrow, listening to that voice turn from crisp to hoarse. When Hephaestus reached this point, his face was full of guilt, and he covered his eyes with his hands. Hearing these words, Sorafine felt no ripples in his heart. After all, the cyberbullying in his past life was far more terrifying than what Hephaestus described. So, he comforted him, Prince Hephaestus, you didn't actually do it, did you? To me, no god can constrain the thoughts in their own mind, there are only suppressed desires. As long as it wasn't carried out, then everything still has a chance. Soraphine's implication was that as long as you haven't taken that step from thought to action, everything can still be salvaged. The flames suddenly flared higher, reflecting the moisture welling up in the depths of Hephaestus's eyes. Soraphine. A heavy sword cannot pierce heart armor, only a whisper can conquer the heart. Hephaestus had never revealed this fragile heart to anyone before. Even when abandoned by Hera or betrayed by Tethys, he had only ever melted his pain into molten iron and forged it into cold artifacts. But facing Soraphine, this god who had defied fate for him. This heart, scorched by raging fire for many years, was now willing to shed all its armor to reveal its softest, most painful, and fragile core. Soraphine smiled at Hephaestus, listening quietly to his words. I truly want to protect this beauty of your world forever. Hephaestus suddenly said. But I fear that my flames will scorch the vitality you nurture, that my iron tools will crush the gentleness surrounding you, and I fear even more that my terrible thoughts will become reality, leaving me without even the qualification to stand by your side, Hephaestus said. Prince Hephaestus, Soraphine said earnestly, when you told me the most fragile parts of your heart, you became a friend who walks forward with me. The friendship between us is like an eternally burning flame that will never be extinguished. In the future, our bond will grow slowly like seed, eventually becoming a great tree that supports the world. Soraphine said. Hearing this, Hephaestus walked slowly toward Soraphine. His pace was sluggish due to his emotions, yet it carried an incomparably firm persistence. He reached out and carefully brushed the hair that fell over Soraphine's shoulder. The temperature of his fingertips carried the residual warmth of the forge, so gentle it was as if he feared disturbing a newly sprouted flower bud. Thank you for forgiving the darkness in my heart, Soraphine. I have forged eternal chains that bound the gods, and I have cast inextinguishable torches that illuminated the darkness. Today, in the name of the fire god, with the hammer in my hand and the raging fire in the furnace as my witness, I promise you eternity. As long as you do not forsake our friendship, I will use fire to forge a bond between us that will never die. His gaze was scorching and sincere, surpassing all the flames in the furnace, looking straight into the depths of Soraphine's eyes, revealing his entire soul. Suddenly, he thought of something. Soraphine was a life-type god, a plant god as well. He then continued, I am willing to use my raging fire to protect the seed of the world for you, so that the seed will not die in the cold, so that darkness will no longer erode the world's crops, and so that deep waters will not dare harm your sprouts. I am willing to forge the most precious metals in the world into shapes you like, creating sturdy protective shells for the seed, so that your domain will forever shine with warm light. I am willing to give up those meaningless disputes and stay by your side, watching you urge the spring sprouts to grow and harvest the autumn fruits, day after day, year after year. This promise has nothing to do with the eyes of the gods, nothing to do with the chasm of status, it lies only in our friendship. Even if time passes, Mount Olympus collapses, and my furnace cools, the friendship between us will be like the seed you have sown, taking root forever in the soil of time, never to wither. Hephaestus said earnestly. Just after Hephaestus finished speaking, all the seed gained a protective outer skin, a grayish-brown film appeared on the apple seed, and the wheat was also wrapped in a layer of sharp little thorns. At this moment, Demeter, sitting in the temple of agriculture, tilted her head, worrying about Soraphine's situation and how he was doing. Just then, her power unexpectedly increased by a notch for no apparent reason. What's going on? Demeter was shocked. The wheat has actually changed. It actually has a protective shell. As the goddess of agriculture, wheat was closely related to her. The growth of wheat also drove the development of agriculture, thereby strengthening her authority. She could control the degree of defense on the wheat, making it harder or easier to eat. How am I so lucky to unexpectedly receive a reward from the world? Ever since Soraphine was born, my luck has improved. Demeter's mood brightened as she spoke with a smile. Hearing Hephaestus's words, Soraphine's expression changed. He hadn't expected Hephaestus to open his heart to him so easily. This god of fire seemed a bit naive. In his previous life, it would have been almost impossible for someone to open their heart to another person, not even to their closest relatives. In fact, Soraphine was wrong, this world was the same. No god would open their heart to another god, it was even more serious here because it meant exposing one's weaknesses to others. So almost no god would do that, but Hephaestus was an exception. He had suffered countless years of cold shoulders, yet he was a noble origin god. Under this disparity, his heart craved redemption, and Soraphine's appearance provided that redemption, allowing him to break through the barriers in his heart and clear the gloom. In normal terms, it was like a person barely scraping by on the poverty line, and then someone gives them $1 million a month to take care of themselves with easy work. They would definitely feel gratitude toward the person who pulled them out of the mire. Hephaestus's current emotions were much like that. Lord Hephaestus, I can also say to you, as long as our friendship does not break, the seed will break through the soil and grow new flowers to provide beauty for the flames, and dried plants will provide fuel for the fire, making it burn even more vigorously. Sorophine said seriously. At that moment, in Tartarus of the underworld, Krios, god of growth, was clutching at something desperately. Wisps of the plant origin flowed away from him, and his power was actually weakening. This only happened when an origin replacement occurred, meaning the newborn power contained Koios' authority over growth. Once this authority grew to a certain point, it would encompass the power of growth. No, my rights, my priesthood. Koios' handsome face was filled with distorted rage. My origin. Let me out. I beg you. Lord Tartarus. I beg you. Seeing that Tartarus did not respond, Koios stared intently at the endless void and said through gritted teeth, Fool Zeus. Before Koios could finish, a gust of black wind flashed by, sealing his mouth shut. On Olympus, Zeus opened his eyes with a hint of a smile on his lips. Koios is actually being replaced. It seems the other titans are not irreplaceable. Apollo, Artemis, Hyperion, and Phoebe, I hope you know what's good for you. Tethys, sleeping in the embrace of Oceanus, the river that encircles the world, had a complex look in her eyes. I clearly did so much, yet I still can't change this fate. Has the world abandoned us? The god of fire from the prophecy was clearly ruined by me. He carries my water origin, he shouldn't have been able to replace any authority. He was destined to have no family, no lovers, and no friends. I have constantly cut off his channels of contact with other gods. How can that prophecy still come true? Tethys said, looking down with lowered eyes. Now the god replacing Koios has appeared. What about the god replacing me? It seems I need to pay more attention to the gods appearing around Hephaestus. Tethys stopped her slumber to recover power and instead used the power of water in the air to monitor Hephaestus. As for Sorophine, he was just a lucky fellow to Tethys, and he posed no threat to her at all. After all, the power he possessed was almost entirely of the life and plant types, and there were already signs of him replacing Koios' power. Those who became gods of greater divine power were the pillars of the world. The power of two pillars cannot be replaced by a single god, the number of pillars can only increase, never decrease. Therefore, it was impossible for Sorophine to replace the power of the ruler of water. But, who decided that? Who says Sorophine can't do it? While the outside world was turbulent, Hephaestus's temple remained filled with a gentle atmosphere. At this time, Sorophine took out his divine artifact, the seed of the world tree. A shell had actually appeared around this divine artifact, and he had a feeling that the world tree had become stronger again. Looking at Hephaestus, Sorophine continued seriously, as long as our friendship is not broken, I will give everything for Lord Hephaestus. Whenever you are injured, I will appear by your side to heal your wounds. As soon as Sorophine finished speaking, the power of the world began to shift. The priesthood of love grew rapidly and split off a new one. Friendship. Aphrodite, who was wandering the earth, instinctively tried to seize this priesthood. After all, she was the ruler of love, and the power of friendship was born from love, a part of the power of emotions, so it naturally belonged to her. Unfortunately, this power only flickered before her eyes before flying toward the desolate lands, finally landing in Hephaestus's temple and splitting in two to merge into the bodies of Sorophine and Hephaestus. Sorophine and Hephaestus became the rulers of friendship. From now on, the voluntary and equal emotional bond based on mutual affection, trust, respect, support, and understanding, transcending the shackles of blood or interest, the love, chosen autonomously from the spiritual world of gods, would be called friendship. Friendship lasts forever. From now on, all things in the world shall possess friendship. The moment the authority of friendship appeared, a flash of joy crossed Hephaestus's eyes. He exclaimed, even the world acknowledges our bond. Sorophine. The divine office of friendship is the witness. Sorophine had not expected that a divine office of friendship would actually appear. In fact, it was because the mutual wariness and scheming among gods had caused losses to the world. When Sorophine and Hephaestus, a pair who came from interests but developed a bond devoid of interests, appeared, the world wanted to expand this kind of power to the entire world. It wanted to let all the gods in the world become friends. As long as all the gods became friends, they would not scheme against or be wary of each other, thereby preventing losses to the world. However, everything has its limits. When taken to the extreme, problems are bound to arise. What would appear at the extreme point of friendship? A flash of inspiration struck Sorafine. He then took out the seed of the world tree and, following the appearance of the peach pit from his past life, generated a seed for a peach tree. He then used the authority of seeds to turn this peach tree into a real seed. Lord Hephaestus, are you willing to witness a miracle with me? Sorafine's eyes were bright, as if the sun and moon from the horizon had transformed into his gaze. Hephaestus's heart skipped a beat. His face, which could be considered handsome even among gods, was full of willingness. All right, Sorafine, I will accompany you in whatever you want to do. Sorafine came to an open space and planted the peach pit. As Sorafine's divine power was sown, the pit cracked open, then took root and sprouted. It quickly grew into a large tree and bore pink fruits. Sorafine said to the world, "This is a peach tree. Its seed have a hard shell, and its fruits are full of sweetness and juice, symbolizing the friendship between me and Hephaestus." Soon, the world agreed to Sorafine's request, and the peach became a symbol of friendship. At this moment, Sorafine's level rose to the late stage of faint divine power, just one step away from becoming an occurrence god. At this time, in the temple of agriculture, Demeter's eyes were shining. Her gaze looked toward the wild lands, watching Sorafine grow the peach tree. My dear child, Sorafine, I didn't expect you to have obtained so many divine offices. It seems I must hold a grand banquet for you. You must know that for other gods, obtaining a new divine office is a major event celebrated by all, requiring a banquet to be held in the pantheon to entertain other gods. That is why Demeter said she would hold a grand banquet for Sorafine. Strictly speaking, a banquet should have been held on the day Sorafine was born, but at that time Sorafine was coveted by others, so Demeter did not hold a banquet for Sorafine. Demeter muttered to herself, I didn't hold a proper banquet for Sorafine before, so this time it must be grand. How about letting it rain wheat all over the world during the banquet? No, no. Demeter immediately shook her head, I already did that at my banquet. Let's have a rain of fresh flowers, it's beautiful and spectacular. Yes, that's decided. Demeter clapped her hands and finalized the plans for Sorafine's banquet. Of course, the time still had to be decided by Sorafine himself. Demeter would handle everything else. Hephaestus looked at the grown peach tree, subconsciously picked one to taste, and gave a thumbs up, so sweet, it's truly delicious. It tastes even better than apples. There were very few fruits in this world, only apples and grapes. The grapes were dry and shriveled, impossible to eat, and could only be used for making wine. And now, a new type of fruit had appeared. The moment the peaches appeared, countless peach seed flew to all parts of the world. It left behind a legend. Among the countless peach trees, a golden peach would be born. Those who tasted the golden peach would reap the purest friendship. This. Hephaestus was so excited he couldn't speak. He hadn't expected that there would be this new kind of plant as a symbol between him and Sorafine. At this moment, a flash of inspiration struck Sorafine. Since peach trees worked, could he generate things from fantasy? For example, sunflowers or pea shooters from Plants vs. Zombies, or even more impressively, turn the flat peach tree, ginseng fruit tree, or Wangjongli into reality. Thinking of it, he acted on it. Sorafine immediately wanted to use the seed of the world tree to generate the seed of those plants. Just at this moment, countless amounts of water transformed into a giant wall that covered the sky and blocked the sun, as if the positions of the sky and the ocean had swapped. A goddess wearing a sea blue crown, holding a pure white shell, with hair like seaweed, stepped on the waves and arrived in front of Sorafine. A trace of surprise flashed in her eyes as she looked at Sorafine. She had originally thought that Sorafine was just a lucky person, chosen by fate from birth to be the god replacing her brother, Krios, god of growth. But what did she see? Sorafine actually already possessed so many divine offices. Seed, fruits, gratitude, friendship, statues, cosmetic surgery. In just 300 years, he had actually obtained so many divine offices. You must know that this was just the time it took for most gods to take a nap, yet he had obtained so many divine offices. However, Tethys did not drop her arrogant posture. After all, Sorafine was only a god of faint divine power. Compared to her, a being of greater divine power, there was no need for her to converse as equals. Even if in the eyes of the world, they were equals. Sorafine, god of seeds. Tethys' tone was full of command and direction. You control the power of seed and plants, you should stay away from the fire gods. They will only bring you pain. You should be with us, the water gods. As long as you leave Hephaestus, I will introduce my children to you. Each of them is very beautiful, not even inferior to Aphrodite, the goddess who controls beauty. Tethys' tone left absolutely no room for negotiation, as if Sorophine would definitely agree. Looking at the arrogant Tethys in front of him, Sorophine frowned, and a bit of displeasure arose in his heart, but he suppressed it. After all, Tethys was a god of greater divine power, and although he, Sorophine, had the possibility of replacing the god of growth, that was only a possibility, and his power was merely faint divine power. Lord Tethys, thank you for your kindness. The relationship between Hephaestus and me is one of friendship, so there is no such thing as leaving or not leaving. And Lord Tethys, your daughters, the 3,000 Oceanids who symbolize the ocean, are very beautiful, but I am only a mere 300 years old, just a child, and I have no thoughts of finding a partner. Sorophine said softly. Standing behind Sorophine, Hephaestus was trembling, his fists clenched tightly. He did not understand why Tethys would treat him like this. When he was bullied in the past because of his ugly appearance, Tethys had not appeared. Hephaestus could deceive himself by saying Tethys was in a deep sleep, but what about now? Tethys had bluntly told the being who helped him, Sorophine, to leave him. What on earth had he done? Not knowing where the courage came from, Hephaestus stepped forward, his eyes bloodshot, staring fixedly at Tethys as he said, Lady Tethys, why must you treat me this way? Why must you take away everything that is most important to me? Why? Did you not tell me that you would be my foster mother and treat me just like your own children? Hephaestus shouted. Upon hearing this, a strange expression flashed across Sorophine's face. Had Tethys not already done so? Just moments ago, Tethys had used her own daughter as a bargaining chip to win him over. In a sense, Tethys loved Hephaestus more than her own children. After all, it was always the river gods and the mountain spring nymphs who suffered the most on the earth. They were all Tethys' children. What a hellish joke. Tethys glanced at Hephaestus and was about to reprimand him when she suddenly seemed to think of something. A faint smile appeared on her face, which then turned indifferent as she said, You should know that Hera is my foster daughter. I have been taking care of her since she was rescued from the belly of Cronus. Hearing Tethys' words, a flash of anger crossed Hephaestus' eyes, and his voice trembled slightly, So you only saved me because of Hera? Yes, because she is just like my own daughter. I love her so much. Sorophine narrowed his eyes. Why did that sound so strange? Did Tethys really love Hera that much? No, if Tethys truly loved Hera, with her abilities, she could have easily persuaded Zeus to restrain himself. Yet she did nothing, watching as Hera suffered the pain of divine soul trauma every day. Is this a display of love? Or perhaps Tethys' definition of love is to let her suffer. Regardless, there is definitely something wrong with Tethys. She has some love for Hera, but certainly not as much as she claims. Although he did not know what Tethys' situation was, Sorophine always felt as if she were guiding Hephaestus to be at odds with Hera. But why? The relationship between Hephaestus and Hera was already very bad, there was no room for it to get any worse, so why do that? Just as Sorophine was pondering this, Tethys continued, I am very sorry for my previous neglect of you, my dear Hephaestus. You know, deities always love beautiful things. You were too ugly in the past, which is why I did not pay attention to you. I apologize to you. Can you return to my side? Tethys said gently. I can guarantee that I will compensate you, Hephaestus. After saying this, Tethys stepped down from the waves and slowly walked in front of Hephaestus, appearing as if she wanted to caress his handsome face. Hephaestus struggled and said, Then why do you want Sorophine to leave me? Because you have changed. Your handsome appearance should be matched with a noble status, not maintaining a friendship with a deity of faint divine power. Your companions should be deities of medium divine power. I can promise you that I will do my best to make you one of the 12 main gods of Olympus. You will possess supreme status, you will have countless followers, and your authority could even advance further. Tethys said temptingly. In Tethys' view, supreme status, the possibility of advancing further, and the adoration of countless believers were an irresistible temptation for Hephaestus, a deity who had long been isolated and lived in a volcano. Upon hearing this, Hephaestus struggled, but soon his eyes became firm. He stood in front of Sorophine and said with a determined face, Thank you for your kindness, Lady Tethys, but I still want to be friends with Sorophine. Perhaps for the me of the past, these conditions would be something I could not refuse, something I would even be willing to give my life to obtain. However, after Sorafine healed me, his words made me realize that sometimes the outside world's perception of me is not that important. What is important is myself, who I am as a person, not other things, Lady Tethys. Hephaestus said firmly, glancing at the composed Sorafine. Are you sure? A trace of surprise appeared on Tethys's face. She had not expected Hephaestus to refuse such generous resources. One had to know, this was the position of a main god. When she had occupied this position in the past, she felt as if the world were under her rule, with countless deities bowing in worship, countless deities showing favor, and demons and nymphs craving a single glance from her. Yet Hephaestus had actually refused. The position of a main god of Olympus is not just any other thing, there are only a mere 12 positions in the world. Strictly speaking, even Zeus is only one of the 12 main gods. Tethys questioned. Hephaestus smiled and said, I have already said it, Lady Tethys, friendship is priceless. Regardless of status or wealth, neither can buy a friend to whom one can entrust everything. Are you so sure that Sorafine is a friend to whom you can entrust everything? Tethys asked with some confusion, you must know that you have only known each other for less than 10 years. How could a mere instant allow you to know what kind of deity Sorafine is? Hephaestus shook his head and said, 10 years is already a long time. For nymphs, this is 1,000th of their lives, for humans, this is already 1/10 of theirs, and for elk and wolves, this is their entire lives. Therefore, Lady Tethys, 10 years is only a short time to us deities. For other creatures, 10 years is enough to see clearly the true nature of their kind. Hephaestus explained slowly. Because I believe that even in this situation, Sorafine would not betray the friendship between us. Hephaestus said firmly, looking at Sorafine. His fiery red eyes were filled with determination, without a trace of impurity. Tethys's expression turned ugly, and a trace of anger rose in her heart, but it vanished in an instant. After all, she was a deity who had experienced the Titan War, how could she get angry so easily? This trace of anger was not directed at Hephaestus, but rather at her loss of control. In her view, Hephaestus's future was within her grasp, but now it had slipped away. Tethys looked at Sorafine with some reluctance and said, what about you? Sorafine, do you also believe in the friendship between you two? As the child of Demeter, have you not inherited her hesitation? Are you not afraid that one day, the power of fire will engulf the entire forest? Tethys approached Sorafine and suppressed him with the pressure of water. Sorafine felt as if the bones of his entire body were wrapped in a film of water. It was uncomfortable, yet he felt no pain. Do you trust Hephaestus that much? Do you not want to test his friendship toward you? A trace of hesitation flashed in Hephaestus's eyes as he looked at Sorafine's unpleasant expression. No, you are wrong, Lady Tethys. I am Sorafine, and my mother is not hesitant, she is simply sensitive. That is not a flaw. On the contrary, it is precisely because of this sensitivity that she was able to become the goddess of agriculture, and wheat became the most important plant in this world. Hearing the word, wheat, Tethys's eyes turned cold. She had once created seaweed as food for humans, but humans preferred to spend time and effort planting wheat rather than eating the gift she had bestowed upon them. That is why she is so powerless. If not for your birth, your mother would still be just a god of mere occurrence. Tethys said sarcastically. So what? At least I have appeared, and being able to bring more powerful strength to my mother is also an opportunity. Sorafine said with difficulty. Tethys hit a wall with Sorafine and her expression shifted slightly, but she quickly composed herself. What about Hephaestus? You still have not answered my question. I do not need to test him to know that Lord Hephaestus is a good friend to whom I can entrust everything. Even if we do not contact each other for a long time, the next time we meet, we will be able to return to the familiar feeling we have now. Sorafine said. Moreover, things that one seeks to test are destined to shatter from the very beginning. If one seeks to test love, then love will eventually end. If one seeks to test friendship, all one gets in the end is separation. When you want to test if a tree will die without water, its death is already sealed. The same goes for the friendship between Lord Hephaestus and me. If I were to do something to test it, then in the future, this friendship would no longer be pure and would eventually lead to separation, drifting further and further apart. Sorafine spoke eloquently, his voice sounding as pleasant and melodious as high mountains and flowing water. If only the chaos world had a piece of music called High Mountains and Flowing Water. Is that so? Tethys fell silent. It was unclear which of Sorafine's words had struck a chord in Tethys's heart, causing her to fall into deep contemplation. Sorafine and Hephaestus also accompanied Tethys in silence. Oceanus, do you think so too? Is that why you would rather fall into a long slumber than wake up to see me? Is it because of that one time I tested you? Tethys' fingertips were wrapped around a tiny river, which, under the influence of her power, formed a circle. When you want to know if a god loves you, and you use everything to prove that love, the love slips away, just like the water at your fingertips. No matter what you do, it will always flow away in every direction. Tethys sighed and said. After speaking, Tethys left. Clearly, she was in no mood to play house with Sorophine and Hephaestus. After all, with her power, she could cast these two gods into Tartarus at any time. Of course, the world's favor upon Sorophine would bring her punishment from the world. But this punishment was not severe. As Tethys departed, a sense of urgency rose in Sorophine's heart. In Tethys' hands, he was like a toy, left to be manipulated at will. Even if he were thrown into Tartarus by Tethys, she would not receive much punishment. Thinking of this, Sorophine knew he had to quickly increase his weight in the world. There were only two ways to quickly increase his weight. The first was to perform his priesthood more often to accumulate the world's favor, and the second was to acquire more priesthoods, especially those of a origin god. The priesthoods that could be obtained had already been mostly taken by him. Now, the most important thing was to acquire the priesthood of ice and snow, and this required Hephaestus to forge a divine artifact. During this period, he could still perform his priesthood to gain the world's favor. Thinking of this, Sorophine's eyes lit up. His time was now arranged. Subsequently, he asked Hephaestus, Lord Hephaestus, may I ask you to help me forge a divine artifact using the portion of the source of water from within your body? Oh. Hephaestus's eyes lit up. What kind of divine artifact? One that can be used for large-scale watering. In some places, seed cannot sprout without sensing the scent of water. I want to try my best to let these seed feel the power of water, so that they can take root and sprout. Good, leave it to me. I will forge it perfectly for you. After speaking, Hephaestus took the mass of source from Sorophine and said, 10 years will be enough. I will use the best materials to forge it for you. Upon hearing the 10-year time frame, Sorophine said, then I will go and perform my priesthood first. After all, various plants across the world need seed to reproduce. I must nurture their offspring for them. Hearing Sorophine's words, Hephaestus was stunned. No, you're going to be a workaholic even for a 10-year period. It's just letting the world's plants go without seed for 10 years, what's the big deal? He had not performed his priesthood to bring volcanic eruptions and fire to the world for tens of thousands of years. Humans now could only barely rely on the power of Hestia to cook food. It's only 10 years, Sorophine. Can't you perform your priesthood after 10 years? Which god acts like you? Hephaestus said. Don't the death gods perform their priesthood every moment? I still need to propagate plants. Sorophine said. Right, there were the death gods. If Sorophine hadn't mentioned them, Hephaestus would have forgotten about that group of gods. They are different. The world is expanding, and souls are increasing, but the number of death gods is insufficient, so they have to work hard. You are different. You are a noble origin god. In the underworld, only Hades, the king of the underworld, holds a status equal to yours, and Hades does not work as hard as you. Hephaestus said. It is different, Lord Hephaestus. I am still too weak right now. I must make myself stronger so that I have the ability to protect myself. Sorophine said earnestly. So, for me right now, every moment, every second is precious, Sorophine said with a very serious look in his eyes. And during these 10 years, I can do my best to fulfill my priesthood and contribute to the world. Originally, Sorophine wanted to say he was seeking the favor of the world, but saying it that way didn't fit the main theme of this world. After all, for the gods of this world, enjoying pleasure and releasing desire were the main themes. Although Sorophine despised such behavior, he would not voice any objections. Hearing Sorophine's words, Hephaestus felt emotional. As expected of Sorophine, he truly was different from other gods, his choice was not wrong. So Hephaestus spoke, Sorophine, then go ahead. No one will harm you while you are fulfilling your priesthood anyway. I will be waiting for you right here. Sorophine nodded to acknowledge this, then began bringing seed to various plants across the world. Meanwhile, the faces of the gods who had just been planning to do something untoward to Sorophine turned green with frustration. Big brother, what are you doing? Why aren't you having some fun? You just obtained your priesthood and immediately went to fulfill it. Do you have to be so serious? Go play with a nymph. Or even a demon if you must. If you keep fulfilling your priesthood like this, we won't have any chance to cause trouble. Meanwhile, Demeter, who was just about to go look for Seraphine, had eyes full of satisfaction. After all, it was a good thing that Seraphine was thinking about improving himself. However, that was followed by heartache. Demeter felt pained that Seraphine hadn't enjoyed a single moment of pleasure since his birth, instead constantly pushing himself to improve. If Seraphine knew what Demeter was thinking, he would surely tell her not to worry. After all, how joyous it was to feel his own strength increasing bit by bit. This was far more satisfying than so-called pleasure. Compared to those joyful things, he felt that increasing his strength was what truly mattered. 10 years passed in a flash, and the world granted another portion of the favor of the world. This bit of favor acted like a catalyst, causing the favor of the world that Seraphine already carried to manifest. It could be said that Seraphine could now contact the world at any time. Thus, in the ritual to obtain a priesthood, he only needed to propose new ideas and strive to. He only needed to propose new ideas, let the world judge if they suited current trends, and finally, complete the final dissemination. Originally, the sequence for obtaining a priesthood should have been: first, the god proposes a draft, then, the god creates the new thing, next, the world verifies it, and finally, the priesthood is granted. Although it was just a reversal of the sequence, it would save Seraphine a vast amount of time. After all, not all new things were suitable for the current era. If it were something wrong, and Seraphine spent a great deal of energy on it only for it to never come to be, wouldn't that be a joke? Perhaps the world had felt Seraphine's persistent heart, which was why it granted him this privilege. Seraphine was stunned. He hadn't expected to receive such a benefit just from fulfilling his priesthood for 10 years. He quickly realized the benefits of this privilege. It could save a massive amount of time. Thus, he submitted everything he could think of from his mind, zither, go, calligraphy, painting, and architectural arts, to the world for review. In the end, almost everything was rejected by the world, leaving only the authority over Chinese architecture. Other things simply did not fit the current era. Seraphine had originally thought that things like the zither, go, calligraphy, and painting would bring about an artistic revolution. However, in the eyes of the world, these things were just a pile of noise with no connection to current arts, and thus they had no effect. Any new thing emerges from the old and carries forward its strengths, but things like the zither, go, calligraphy, and painting did not inherit anything from the various arts of the present. At this moment, the 10 deities symbolizing art, Apollo and the 9 muses, exchanged glances. Apollo, holding a lyre, spoke with a voice as melodious as a warbling oriole, noisy things, trying to create a new category of art. Euterpe, the muse of music, looked at Apollo with admiration. Lord Apollo, you are the master of art. These noisy things will gradually turn to dust with the passage of time, only your art will endure forever. Apollo nodded and said, it seems we have not appeared on the earth for too long, so human art has become increasingly degraded. When the sun chariot has traversed the sky 3 times, we shall head to the earth to spread art, Apollo said. The other 9 muses nodded in agreement. Apollo assumed that the things like the zither, go, calligraphy, and painting that had just appeared were arts developed by humans, so he wanted to reshape human artistic concepts. It was normal for Apollo to think this way, it had nothing to do with intelligence. This was because art is born from culture and lays a unique foundation for its development. The new cultures brought by Seraphine were not born from the various cultures within the chaos world, but came from his previous life. This led to a lack of compatibility. To the gods of the chaos world, these things were just noise, something of no consequence. At this moment, Seraphine also felt some emotion and calmed his heart. He had still made the mistake that all transmigrators make, being too full of himself. He thought his insights were unique, unaware that his power was just that of one member within the chaos world. He was just a transmigrator, not an omniscient and omnipotent god. He had forgotten the most important phrase from his previous life's education: analyze specific situations concretely. Seraphine had subconsciously assumed that those things from his previous life were useful, so he promoted things like the zither, go, calligraphy, and painting to the world. However, these new things were not necessarily useful to this world, or at least not very useful at this stage. The core function of art is to express the thoughts and emotions of gods or sentient beings, recording the era and life. At the same time, it can enhance aesthetics, bring spiritual comfort, inspire thinking, and promote the progress of culture and heritage. Art is a deeply cultural thing. After this change, Seraphine truly became humble. He merely possessed the cultural heritage of another world more than other gods. It didn't mean he necessarily possessed more power or understanding than they did. He had actually fantasized about creating a new culture in this world. It was truly too arrogant. However, what surprised and puzzled Sorafine was that Chinese garden architecture unexpectedly harmonized with the art of this world. The harmony between all things and nature, combined with a bit of divine modification, was surprisingly fitting. However, since architecture was feasible, Sorafine decided to shape this priesthood after visiting Hephaestus's temple. After all, if one does not take what heaven offers, one will suffer the consequences. Moreover, the power of architecture could provide him with feedback, allowing his divine power to progress, and it might even bring in faith. Afterward, he quickly headed toward Hephaestus's temple. 10 years had passed, and Hephaestus should have finished forging that divine artifact. This artifact was a key item concerning whether he could obtain the priesthood of ice and snow and acquire a series of subsequent powers. Soon, Sorafine flew into Hephaestus's temple with great anticipation. He saw the handsome Hephaestus holding a kettle. He spoke to Sorafine with some dissatisfaction. "Oh, dear Sorafine, you are a bit unpunctual. Didn't you say you were only going to fulfill your priesthood for 10 years? It's been over a dozen years now, almost 20. The difference from the time you mentioned seems a bit large." Sorafine immediately pressed his palms together and apologized, saying, "I am very sorry, dear Hephaestus. I felt new powers while fulfilling my priesthood, so I forgot the time to come here. I promise I won't do it again next time." However, Hephaestus was only speaking casually and didn't truly intend to give Sorafine any trouble. Hephaestus handed the kettle in front of him to Sorafine and said, "This is the divine artifact I forged for you. This is the first divine artifact I have forged since my rebirth." Sorafine gently stroked the divine artifact. Its appearance was like an elegant long-necked watering can, meticulously carved from a material resembling warm green chalcedony. The left side of the kettle was engraved with various flowers, while the right side featured all sorts of rare and exotic plants. The top was inlaid with a red gemstone that radiated Hephaestus's primordial aura. Inside the kettle, there was a faint shimmer of oat-like golden flowing water. The neck of the kettle was slender, like that of a swan. The spout resembled a blooming flower, and the handle was a curved piece of olive wood that carried Zeus's aura, entwined with ivy and feeling warm to the touch. Hephaestus spoke proudly to Sorafine, "Sorafine, this divine artifact I forged for you perfectly fits your authority of seeds. The most important feature of this divine artifact is that you can store various types of water inside. As long as you have the ability, it can store a nearly infinite amount of water. You can also use divine power to transform it into a water source, or it can automatically collect water from the world. Furthermore, it can transform the water within into different types. Due to the materials used, it can only transform into 2 types of water. The first type contains the pure power of life, which can quickly heal the wounds of plants and combine with your power of seed to make them grow and sprout rapidly. The second type is water that always remains warm, with no other effects. Give this divine artifact a name," Hephaestus said, looking at Sorafine. Hearing this, Sorafine pondered for a moment, then looked up and said, "Since it can hold so much water, let's call it kettle." Hephaestus's mouth twitched. Wouldn't that name be a bit too plain? How about changing it? The name is okay, isn't it?" Sorafine scratched his head awkwardly and said sheepishly. Sorafine's behavior was equivalent to saying that if a longsword was very sharp, it should be called longsword, henceforth. Then how about calling it the holy pot of warm spirit? Hephaestus immediately settled on the name. If Sorafine brought out the divine artifact next time and someone asked what it was called, and he said, kettle, he, Hephaestus, would be laughed to death for forging a kettle. That works too, Sorafine nodded. After chatting with Hephaestus for a few more years, Sorafine eagerly returned to the earth. Using the hot water mode of the holy pot of warm spirit, he poured a large amount of water into a depression and then transformed the water into tiny, visible bead-like particles. Soon, as these tiny beads slowly flowed, they eventually formed something like an invisible wall, yet without the physical obstruction of a wall. Sorafine named this substance mist. Sorafine then scattered the mist across the earth. Unfortunately, this mist had a weakness: it was countered by the sun. Once illuminated by sunlight, the mist dissipated, so it could only appear at night. When Sorafine scattered the mist to the final location, a new priesthood appeared in the world, mist. This priesthood existed as a spectacle, a wonder occurring at specific times after the moon sets and before the sun rises, adding a touch of beauty to the world. When the priesthood of mist merged into Soraphine's body, he felt very joyful. After all, now that he had obtained the origin of water, could the power of ice and snow be far behind? Subsequently, Soraphine transformed water into a solid, fixed it in one place, and released a large amount of heat. After creating ice, Soraphine took a deep breath and said to the world, "This is ice, water in a solid state. When it melts into liquid water, it absorbs a vast amount of fire and heat. Without enough fire and heat, it will remain solid forever. Furthermore, this sensation is called cold, the opposite of heat." Soraphine explained seriously. The world law was very hesitant. After all, ice and snow were of little use to the world, at most serving as another decoration. Soraphine had just generated a new type of decoration, so there was no need for another one so soon. However, upon hearing Soraphine name the power opposite to heat is cold, the world law finally recognized the existence of the power of ice and snow. Following this, the authority of ice and snow merged into Soraphine's body, and the illusory divine office of temperature also lingered around him as a future power. Originally, by logic, Soraphine should not have been able to form ice and snow, but ice and snow were born as derivative powers of the soon-to-be-born power of temperature. Only then did the world law allow the appearance of ice and snow. At this moment, deep within the distant underworld, Nyx, the master of fate, opened her eyes. Those eyes seemed to hold the entire world, yet also seemed veiled by the night. She parted her vermilion lips and spoke with some confusion, "The divine office of temperature. Why would such a power appear among Sister Gaia's descendants? By logic, this authority should only be born among the descendants of Erebus and me. Could it be that because of the birth of Thanatos and Hypnos, my other children can no longer obtain powerful authorities?" At this moment, Nyx was very puzzled. The power of temperature is to establish the difference between hot and cold, but the moment darkness and night appeared, it represented the birth of difference. Colors were born because of this, and fate was conceived in the cracks between them. Therefore, the divine office of temperature should be a subordinate priesthood to her and Erebus, god of darkness. Why would it appear on Soraphine, a descendant of her sister Gaia? Interesting. Nyx cast a glance at Soraphine. She wanted to see how far this future master of temperature could go. Whether he had the potential to become the sixth primordial god. As for why Nyx thought this way, it was because she saw Soraphine's source artifact, that seed of the world tree. As long as the seed of the world tree grew up, it would make a huge contribution to the expansion of the world and become one of the pillars of the world. Soraphine looked around, his brows slightly furrowed. An illusion. He always felt that someone was watching him the moment he obtained the priesthood of ice and snow, but there was clearly nothing around, not even a blade of grass growing. Afterwards, Soraphine lowered his head to think about whether he had said anything strange or leaked anything. Thinking of this, Soraphine's heart tightened. He had mentioned things like the four arts chin, chess, calligraphy, and painting to the world law. Apart from this flaw, there was nothing else. Thinking of this, Soraphine had a premonition that he must solve this problem, otherwise, it would have a serious impact on him in the future. He had been dazzled by the rewards given by the world. To think he had let such fatal things out. However, in fact, these were just small problems for Soraphine. There were other gods like him. After all, some gods would sleep for tens of thousands of years, becoming disconnected from the world, which would produce some strange things. Although these things about Soraphine were conspicuous, they did not attract the attention of other gods. Just as Soraphine was thinking, Hephaestus strode on flames and hurried over from afar. When he saw Soraphine and made eye contact with him, he even smiled and greeted him. Why did Hephaestus come over? What was he doing here? Shouldn't he be forging artifacts in his temple? Just as Soraphine was stunned, Hephaestus flashed over quickly and hugged Soraphine excitedly. Lord Hephaestus, what's wrong with you? Soraphine was stunned and asked Hephaestus. Hephaestus said to Soraphine, "Oh, my dear Soraphine. What did you just do? I am so happy. You are truly my lucky star." Nothing, right? Soraphine said, somewhat puzzled. My power suddenly grew. Soraphine, and this part of the increased power has something to do with you. Hephaestus let go of Soraphine and said. Soraphine looked at Hephaestus, at a loss and full of confusion. What does your power growth have to do with me? I didn't do anything to you. Lord Hephaestus. Before Soraphine could finish, Hephaestus couldn't wait to speak. Soraphine, did you just obtain the power of ice and snow? Hearing this, Soraphine was stunned, nodded, and said, yes, what's the matter? I just wanted to embellish the world with a new landscape. And this is a landscape formed by the power of water. Because at that time, I was thinking that the current world is too monotonous and should have more decorative colors, so I wanted to turn water into a solid state. Solid water used to decorate my temple should have a nice aesthetic. And solid water can also be considered a special type of ore, which can provide new inspiration for you to forge artifacts. Hearing Soraphine's words, Hephaestus said very seriously, "Thank you for remembering me. However, I am very sure that the moment the power of ice and snow was formed, the authority of fire and the source of fire that I had lost actually returned, and it even grew. I am now a god of the late medium divine power stage, just one step away from becoming a god of greater divine power." Hephaestus said excitedly. Hearing this, Soraphine was stunned. "Buddy, why did you get to grow? I didn't grow at all and got stuck at a bottleneck." That's right. After Soraphine obtained the power of ice and snow, he instantly became at the peak of faint divine power, and there was still a large amount of power accumulated in Soraphine's body, with a bottleneck holding him tightly. To become a god of occurrence, he still needed to proclaim his divine name. The world did not expect that there would be such an odd god as Soraphine, who reached the peak of faint divine power so quickly. Normal gods should slowly fulfill their priesthood, understand their authority, and finally let their divine name merge into the world, naturally becoming a god of occurrence. Other gods are like finishing elementary school, taking exams, and going to middle school. Although the elementary school knowledge is not very solid, they still know it. But Soraphine is different. He learned all 6 years of knowledge in the first grade and wants to take the middle school entrance exam. However, he is too young, and the world has not prepared the exam that belongs to him, so he is stuck here. However, Soraphine immediately thought of a way. Since he needs recognition, he will let his power appear in large quantities in this world and accelerate the spread of his power in this world. In this way, he will be able to become a god of occurrence. Thank you, Soraphine. Hephaestus thanked him again. Although Soraphine was stuck at a bottleneck, he was also happy for Hephaestus, they were friends. And the stronger Hephaestus is, the more benefits it will be for him. It's just that there is one thing Soraphine doesn't understand. Why did Hephaestus's power of fire grow when the power of ice and snow appeared? Fortune follows misfortune. Impossible. The power of ice and snow has only barely formed. In the world's definition, it is just a kind of spectacle. How could it contend with such a powerful force as fire? If Soraphine knew that a phantom divine office of temperature was hidden in his body, then everything would be solved. But now is not the time to consider this. After all, he has to eliminate the flaw he left behind. So he must first develop the power of art, let himself become a member of the art pantheon, and thus turn that flaw into his characteristic. Soraphine has prepared to use the architectural priesthood as a springboard to promote the art he possesses, and to combine it with the culture of the current chaos world, thereby transforming his own various, chin, chess, calligraphy, and painting. Soraphine smiled at Hephaestus and said, "You are welcome, Lord Hephaestus. If anything comes up later, please let me know at any time. Also, if you get injured while forging divine artifacts, you can come to me, I will heal you. Now, I am going to obtain a new priesthood." Soraphine waved at Hephaestus and said. Hearing Soraphine's words, Hephaestus couldn't help but be taken aback. Why do you want to obtain a priesthood again? You haven't slept even once since you were born, have you? At least in my view, you should get some proper rest. Why push yourself so hard? You are an independent individual, not a puppet of the world, nor a vassal to anyone. Why are you doing so much, exactly? Hephaestus looked at Soraphine with great curiosity. He always felt that Soraphine enjoyed this feeling, but did anyone actually like working? Soraphine was silent for a moment and sighed. If someone had asked him this question in his past life, he could only put on a fake smile and say, because there was no choice. His abilities and bloodline destined him to be nothing more than a beast of burden in a tiny cubicle, facing that square screen all day long, squeezed into a 7-foot space, never knowing joy. His whole life was nailed into these orderly grids, drifting with the tide, unable to break free. But now, it is different. In this world called chaos, everything is different. He is lucky, he was a god the moment he was born. His power comes from the world's gift, and his authority stems from the world's origin. This is the first time he has truly grasped his own future, rather than being pushed along by the waves of the era. Although he is still weak, even the humblest plants can grow slowly, eventually becoming an irreplaceable existence in the world one day. He is grateful for the meteor that brought him to this world, grateful for the opportunity it brought to weave his own destiny by hand, and grateful to be able to witness every morning and evening of growth, harvest, and beauty of all things. Because he has seen the numbness of his past life, he must move forward, must climb upward, until he stands at the pinnacle of this world, until he sees a farther landscape. Perhaps this can soothe the numbness of his past life. In fact, Sorafine thinks he is quite hypocritical. In his past life, so many countries were in war, and two-thirds of the people were starving. He was fortunate to be born in such a country free from want, but people always change. He used the examples of those countries to tell himself not to be greedy, that he was already living well. He had a decent job and a house that belonged only to him, yet numbness still grew in his heart like weeds. That is why, upon coming to this world, he has worked so hard to change himself, desperately obtaining priesthoods, desperately making himself stronger. He fears numbness, feeling that he was not like a living being back then, but rather a stone to be moved at will. Thus, Sorafine looked up and looked earnestly at Hephaestus. Lord, we stand at the pinnacle of this world, and everything we contribute, the world will reward. How fortunate this is, how could I not do my best? Hephaestus, however, shook his head gently. We are originally part of the world, incarnations of concepts. Even if we do nothing, our power will grow with time. Just like you, Sorafine, you symbolize the power of seed. Since you were born, there have been seed in the world. You only need to exist, and this concept will not disappear. What you want to do now is merely an embellishment. But this embellishment is crucial to them, Sorafine said with a firm tone. If an endangered plant produces seed and reproduces, the entire species can continue. If wheat produces plump ears of grain, humanity has food to survive. Even for the humblest weeds, if they produce seed, their leaves can become fodder for herbivores. All things can flourish because of this. He walked to the edge of the desolate cliff and pointed to a half-withered blade of grass in a crack in the rock. Its leaves were scorched yellow, but in the center, a speck of emerald green struggled to survive. However, if wheat loses its seed, it is just a useless bundle of dry stalks. If grapes no longer bear fruit, the vines are left with nothing but empty climbing. If a plant can no longer leave behind seed, it will completely disappear in the long river of time. Perhaps a god once saw what it looked like, but memories will eventually be pressed deep into the depths by the years, until they are forgotten. He turned around and looked at the fire god with clear eyes. What I do is meaningful to the world and meaningful to life, just as I healed your appearance. Lord Hephaestus, you stand too high. You cannot see those creatures struggling in the mud. But look at this blade of grass, how tenacious it is, how hard it is trying to live. All things have the right to live, and before they reach their end, they deserve the chance to leave behind their own marks, passed down from generation to generation. This is the meaning of seed, this is the meaning of my efforts, not just reproduction, but inheritance. Plants originate from the gift of Lady Gaia, but they are also incredibly fragile. Wind, rain, accidents, and time can easily erase the evidence of a plant's existence. But if there is one more seed, there is one more hope for survival, one more possibility for continuation. Sorafine opened his arms, as if embracing all things in the world. Hephaestus stared at Sorafine, and a bright light gradually rippled in his eyes. He had never seen such a god before. Other gods, even newly born ones, viewed all living things as insignificant as weeds, never caring about their life, death, joy, or sorrow. Yet Sorafine could see the longing of plants, the expectations of humans, and the hopes of animals, and he was willing to use his own power to bring new possibilities to the world. His power came from the world, yet he transformed this power into a gift for all living things. He never owed this world anything, rather, it was the creatures of this world who should offer him the most devout gratitude and faith. It was just a pity that plants lacked intelligence and could not condense faith, and humans, who could provide faith, were not the main subject of his care. If everything Sorafine did was for the sake of humanity, the power of faith he possessed at this moment would likely be no less than that of many gods of medium divine power. But it was precisely because he was not that he could still stand here safely at this moment, instead of being imprisoned in the deep dungeon of some god. Hephaestus was silent for a long time, and finally spoke softly. I never thought that this was how you viewed all of this, Sorafine. Sorry, my words just now were rash. What you are doing is very great. It's just. He paused, his voice carrying a hint of imperceptible emotion. You give so much for plants, yet you reap not a shred of faith. Such a path, can you really keep walking it? Sorafine shook his head gently, looking at Hephaestus, his eyes flickering with a complex expression, and said softly, I don't know. I don't know if I can keep going, but before I stop moving forward, I will keep doing this. I do not crave their faith, because this is something I chose to do myself, not out of anyone's prayers or requests. This is just a one-sided giving, nothing more. Sorofine's voice was cold, yet his words were filled with warmth and compassion. A selfless, devoted God. Does such a God really exist? A trace of trance rose in Hephaestus's heart. Sorofine was too different from other gods. Why would the world give birth to such a God who is willing to care for other lives? Gods are natural rulers, just as that ancient proverb says, there is no class that betrays its own class. Sorofine, as a god, exerts effort for the lowly plants that he rules. Why is this? Why are you doing this? Hephaestus finally couldn't help but ask, why are you able to go to such lengths? Sorofine's gaze was calm as he replied, I just want to give them a chance to continue surviving, a possibility to become stronger. The appearance of every seed is a brand new hope. He looked into the distance, his voice soft yet firm. Your Highness Hephaestus, plants are weak, but they are also very tenacious. Being small does not mean they are not worth saving, and being strong does not mean being powerful. The arrival of seed is precisely to grant them new possibilities, to let them continue, and this is the meaning of my existence. Perhaps, I could just rest and let the power of the seed manifest naturally over time. But how long would that take? 100 years? 200 years? Or even longer? By then, seed would become a luxury, a miracle hanging high above the world. Its power would only become a distant legend, an ethereal message, just like some gods who are looked up to but no longer descend. Sorofine opened his hands and, leaning close to Hephaestus, made a very serious promise. What I want to do is to make seed reach every kind of plant, to let all vegetation have the right to produce seed and fruits, so that seed are no longer just playthings for a few gods to admire, but truly the hope for the survival of plants. Sorofine's words deeply shocked Hephaestus. The god of fire was silent for a long time before finally lifting his eyes, his gaze burning as he said, Sorofine, since this is what you think, then please allow me to accompany you. I will bring you new strength, and I am willing to change this future that has been silent for too long with you. Is that allowed? Upon hearing this, a smile appeared on the corner of Sorofine's mouth. Of course. I welcome all fellow travelers who are willing to embark on this long journey with me. A rugged road does not crave the destination as much as it craves partners to climb it together. Your joining might truly bring new possibilities. He paused, his voice sounding as if it held the echo of wind and fire intertwined. The scorching flames will burn away all darkness and decay, withered vegetation should become nutrients for new sprouts. Only in this way, with endless life, can the inheritance truly continue. These words quietly triggered a new power, and the prototype of the inheritance divine office appeared. The illusory priesthood lingered within the origin of the world, anxious and eager to find its master, Sorofine. It was just a pity that Sorofine had not truly practiced his vow yet, so this priesthood could not become a true origin. Only when Sorofine strives for plants and for the inheritance of all things will this priesthood truly merge into his divinity and become a part of his power. And at that moment, even King Zeus would not be able to easily make a move against him. Because a god who symbolizes inheritance is, in a sense, the cornerstone of the god-king's rule. If even inheritance disappeared, all things would eventually wither, and the god-king would lose the meaning of his existence, falling from the supreme throne to become merely a god who wields thunder, no longer possessing his current majesty and glory. Then, what should we do now? Hephaestus asked, a cluster of fire seemingly igniting in his heart, a fire named protection. He wanted to protect this strange friend. His strange ideas were unorthodox, yet they did not make Hephaestus uncomfortable. Instead, they gave him a sense of holiness that he could not describe. Sorofine's words brought him an indescribable shock and also awakened a kind of long-lost, near-belief power. Thus, Sorofine continued to walk on the earth, with Hephaestus following closely behind. A legend gradually spread in the world. Wherever the god of seed and fruits passed, fire followed. Withered vegetation was burned into nutrients for new seed. Because of this, dying creatures feared the arrival of Hephaestus, even once classifying him among the gods of the underworld, while new life joyfully welcomed the statues of Sorofine, hoping he would bring seed of continuation. However, Sorofine's high-profile spreading of the power of seed also invisibly touched upon some of Gaia's authority, especially the authority of gestation, which was the source of her title as Mother Goddess. Although the scope of the authority of seeds that Sorofine wielded was only limited to the reproduction of plants, his deeds were sung among humans. In a sense, he also contributed a strength to the continuation of humanity. This took away a portion of Gaia's priesthood, but the Earth Mother was not unhappy. On the contrary, she felt gratified. Finally, someone was willing to shoulder the responsibility of performing this priesthood, so she could continue to slumber and repair her damaged origin. For Gaia, except for the authority of the Earth, all other authorities could be discarded. All other powers on her combined were not as important as the Earth itself. Therefore, when Seraphine inexplicably began to perform the duties of the priesthood of gestation, Gaia was very happy, even wanting to bestow a reward at one point. But Seraphine was always running on the earth, constantly bestowing seed and contributing to the inheritance of plants, so the Earth Mother did not want to disturb this diligent, little bee. So she decided that when Seraphine rested, she would bring him to the temple and bestow new authority upon him. After all, since there were seed and fruits, how could there be no flowers to adorn them? Without flowers to adorn them, how would one know the sweetness of the fruits? For the blooming of flowers, the fruits would become more plump, full, and sweet, and also more endearing. Such a priesthood would surely be very useful to Seraphine. Gaia was speechless. At this moment, Seraphine had been tirelessly performing his priesthood for 500 years without sleep or rest. It was normal for Hephaestus to be able to do so. After all, his long divine life had made him accustomed to the weight of time. For him, these 500 years were more like a period of companionship and witnessing. But what about Seraphine? He had only been born for 300 years, yet he had performed his priesthood for 300 years. Except for the time spent communicating with Hephaestus, he had been performing his priesthood the entire time, and now, he had spent these 500 years continuously performing his priesthood as well. What did he think of himself as? An unceasing star. A tireless law. No, even solid rock wears away in the wind and rain, yet he seemed even more stubborn than metal or stone. Finally, when the seed of the last plant settled safely in the wind, Seraphine stopped in his tracks. Looking at the vegetation growing wildly across the mountains and plains, a faint smile crossed his lips. Yes, a god like him was never meant to rest. He was a god destined to climb to the highest peak and witness eternity. He wanted to be the freest of all. Seraphine lifted his eyes, his gaze calm yet sharp. He was currently assigning the time for plants to produce seed according to the rotation of the 3 seasons, even though he had set the maturity of most seed to the bountiful autumn. That was the season of abundant fruits, the moment when all things stored up vitality in preparation for passing on their legacy. However, Seraphine knew clearly that all the order he had established was subject to the rotation of the seasons governed by the 3 goddesses of time. If they were to withdraw the authority over the seasons, the rules he had set would immediately collapse. Thinking of this, a sharpness appeared in Seraphine's eyes. He was no great saint, he was merely a traveler on the path of seeking truth. He was willing to strive for the possibility of continuation for plants and all living things because their legacy was inextricably linked to his priesthood. As all things flourished, his authority would increase accordingly. As all living beings continued, his path would become broader. His goal was always to reach the pinnacle of the world, and he would unhesitatingly clear away any obstacles, whether god or mortal. However, when there was no conflict of interest and their goals were aligned, he was also willing to fight for a moment of respite for those tiny creatures. But this was different. The 3 goddesses of time were gods, part of the rules themselves. They would not be willing to share their authority with another god, and Seraphine was not willing to have his lifeline controlled by other gods. Therefore, the conflict between them was destined to lead to a replacement of their primordial essence. Either Seraphine's seed would become an appendage of the 3 goddesses of time, or the 3 goddesses of time would become subordinates to Seraphine. Of course, there was a third option. Seraphine could engage in an exchange of interests with the 3 goddesses of time, with Seraphine trading for a portion of the 3 goddesses of time, primordial essence. However, almost no god was willing to hand over their primordial essence to another god. Seraphine turned around, looked at Hephaestus, and said, Hephaestus, in the process of performing my priesthood, I have discovered a fatal flaw, which is the seasons. Therefore, I must return to Olympus. Hearing this, Hephaestus said with a worried expression, Do you need me to go with you? At that very moment, the eldest sister of the 3 goddesses of time, Onomia, the goddess of spring and law, turned pale. She said to her remaining 2 sisters in panic, Oh, have you felt it, my dear sisters? I suddenly feel that my priesthood of spring is crumbling. Dike, the goddess of summer and fairness, also chimed in, Sister, I felt it too. What should we do? What are we to do? Irene, the goddess of autumn and prosperity, wore an innocent expression and asked in confusion, "Sigh, why didn't I feel it? In fact, I feel that I might even have the potential to advance further. But since you sisters are having problems, let's go find mother. She is the goddess of justice, she should have a way," the third sister, Irene, added. No. The eldest sister, Onomia, the goddess of spring, said with a sharp look in her eyes, "Mother needs to be calm right now. We cannot disturb her, and this matter is our own affair. If we go to mother, it might actually make things worse." Onomia used her divine power to shroud herself and her two sisters. "So, we must find out for ourselves why this premonition appeared, and why you, third sister, have the potential to advance further." Dike, the goddess of summer and fairness, nodded in agreement. Irene, the goddess of autumn and prosperity, hesitated for a moment before nodding as well. She did not want to argue with her two sisters. She did not understand why, even when there was already a premonition of their priesthood being lost, they still insisted on doing it themselves, just to maintain their dignity. In Irene's view, the priesthood was more important. Face and the light could be set aside for now. They should stabilize the priesthood first. Besides, even their father, King Zeus, had experienced times of downfall and had sought help from other gods. Why did her two sisters still have to maintain this strange sense of dignity? At this moment, just as he was about to head to Mount Olympus, a rainbow suddenly spread across the horizon. The seven-colored light was more dazzling than any rainbow Seraphine had ever seen. Countless colorful halos spread from the distant sky, and the gorgeous colors dyed the clouds, dreamlike and illusory. Amidst the flowing light, a goddess descended gracefully. She was draped in a seven-colored cloak, with rainbows like light gauze floating behind her. She held a long staff swirling with rainbow light and cloud patterns. Her face was bright and beautiful, wearing a smile and a lively expression. It was Iris, the goddess of the rainbow. Carrying the clouds and radiance of the sky, she stopped quietly in front of Seraphine and bowed, saying, "Dear Prince Seraphine, the council of all gods will be held in 1 year. The great King Zeus has asked me to invite you to attend the council of all gods." The council of all gods was held regularly once every 1,000 years. Of course, a origin god also had the right to convene a meeting at will, but if the matter was not significant enough, it could easily affect the relationship between the convening god and the other gods. After all, not everyone was willing to be dragged into work while they were resting. Routine council of all gods meetings usually involved casually discussing some minor matter, followed by a long, joyous process. Simply put, a routine council of all gods was a silver party, while a council of all gods convened by a origin god was a major event affecting the world, such as the birth of a new primordial in the world, or an incident where a god was offended by a creature below the level of a god. For example, 3,000 years ago, the incident where the river gods of the Tamuli River were killed by the demigod Sagas caused the gods to convene an emergency council of all gods to discuss the disposal of Sagas, and in the end, Sagas was thrown into Tartarus. This council of all gods was merely a routine meeting, but Zeus, worried that Seraphine might forget to attend, specifically sent Iris to find Seraphine. Seraphine nodded earnestly, indicating that he understood, and responded to Iris, "Thank you for the notification, I will attend the council of all gods." Sensing that the Seraphine before her had already reached the peak of faint divine power, Iris seemed to have more to say, but held back due to some apprehension and flew away. After flying a distance away, Iris looked at the clouds on the horizon with a complex expression and said, "Oh, my sisters, if only I possessed the same ability as Seraphine, I could bring you out of Tartarus. It is a pity that I am far too weak. What must I do to bring you out?" The sisters of Iris, the rainbow goddess, were collectively known as the Harpies. There were 3 of them in total, representing the goddesses of sea storms, extreme speed, and the dark veil, respectively. They were all children of Taumas, the wonder of the sea, and Electra, one of the Oceanids. However, under the instruction of their parents, the rainbow goddess became a subordinate deity to Zeus, while the Harpies stood by the side of the second-generation king of gods, Cronus, becoming his messengers. The fate of the Harpies was, naturally, to be cast into Tartarus by Zeus and the deities under his command. This was why Iris, the rainbow goddess, envied Seraphine's power, because this rainbow goddess was also only at the peak of faint divine power, just one step away from becoming an occurrence deity. While Seraphine was discussing the trip to Olympus with the rainbow goddess, a battle was erupting inside the Temple of Lightning on Olympus. Hera, the ruler of marriage, wore a look of fury upon her face. Like a storm wrapped in thunder, she stormed straight into Zeus's temple. Inside the hall, Zeus was already seated upon his throne, as if he had long anticipated her arrival, looking as cold and detached as a meticulously carved statue. Zeus. Before Hera could even utter the first syllable, Zeus had already shrouded the temple with the power of lightning. Hera's voice was filled with resentment, mixed with shrill and ferocious screams. She stared fixedly at the figure on the throne, her face contorting in extreme rage and anguish. She looked like a crazed, jealous wife, her eyes wide with fury, yet simultaneously like a tragically abandoned maiden, so sorrowful it was heartbreaking. Why must you treat me this way? You know. You clearly know everything. Tears burst forth without warning, rolling from her wide eyes and pattering onto the polished temple floor, blooming into illusory, rootless flowers. They were the manifestations of her suffering, beautiful yet fragile, much like her already riddled and shattered dignity. Zeus merely lifted his eyes slightly, his expression maintaining its habitual, almost cruel indifference. Hera, why must you be so agitated? Control your emotions. Sorafine, he is the child of you and sister Demeter, isn't he? She rushed forward, nearly throwing herself before the throne. Are you unwilling to even pretend anymore? Do you not even wish to deceive me anymore? You clearly know what my priesthood is. You clearly know that doing this will leave me with indelible scars. Why must you tear them open time and time again? With the last word, Hera even roared it out. Her voice trembled, every word saturated with the bitterness accumulated over millions of years. The moment Sorafine was born, the punishment the world inflicted upon me, just like before, burned upon my divine godhood, carving indelible cracks. Zeus. As long as he lives for one day, as long as those children of yours are still alive, it is as if I am being scorched by flames, pierced by thunder, and suffocated by deep waters. Every time these wounds flare up, I wish I could tear apart my own divine soul. Hera grabbed Zeus's shoulders violently, her fingernails almost embedding themselves into Zeus's divine body. You can be philandering, you can sire offspring with any goddess, but why must it be them? Why is it that every time you betray me, I am the one who must endure the excruciating pain of divine punishment? Do you know how the humans on earth whisper about me in their hearts? Jealous Hera. Ridiculous Hera. Stupid Hera. These titles are like poisoned needles, piercing my heart day and night. I cannot even safeguard my own marriage, acting like a complete failure. By what right can I maintain the marriages of mortals? Hera shook Zeus's body hysterically, tears and madness intertwined. Then go kill those humans who offend you, hang their heads above the temple, tear their tongues from their throats, and make them dare not speak again, instead of complaining to me here. Zeus remained in his comfortable posture and said indifferently. I can sire children with you, but how terrible are the children I have sired with you. Zeus sneered and said, the ugly Hephaestus, the reckless Ares, the mediocre Eileithyia, the cowardly Hebe. These are the children born from our union. Zeus looked at Hera and said with disgust, of this lot, only Ares is somewhat normal, though unfortunately, his stupidity cannot be remedied. A child who possesses powerful combat abilities but lacks wisdom is nothing but a disaster. And so what? At the very least, they are our children. Hera roared, I love them all the same. They are our children, the children of the God Queen. From the moment of their birth, they have carried the gaze of all the gods. Unfortunately, they are just a bunch of mud that cannot support a wall. Each of them has their own flaws. Such deities will sooner or later be exploited by other gods, eventually becoming their henchmen, not even as good as subordinate deities. Zeus said indifferently. No. I can protect them. Hera rambled on, arguing that Zeus's words were wrong. Zeus listened to Hera's words very patiently. After she finished speaking, after such a long time, he was neither angry nor upset. He merely raised his hand slightly and used the power of lightning to brush away Hera's hands that were dug into his muscles. The gesture was as if brushing away an insignificant speck of dust from his shoulder. Are you finished, Hera? His voice was calm, piercing through all of Hera's crying and accusations, making Hera's weeping and grief seem like a joke. Since you have finished venting, you may leave. Today's events will not spread outside this temple. I have already shrouded the temple with the power of lightning. No one will know of your undignified state just now. You remain the noble, revered God Queen of Olympus. Noble. Revered. Ha ha ha. Hera stumbled backward, letting out a series of broken and tragic laughs, her eyes completely plunged into desperate madness. You are always like this, always facing me with this calm demeanor, making me look like a lunatic, like a resentful woman. Zeus, how can your shamelessness be so composed? Your heart, does it not possess any love at all? What about your rage? You are so cold even when speaking of torture and punishment. Inside the pantheon, bright red roses spread silently, blooming over every inch of ground where her tears fell, reflecting Hera's shattered figure. It was so ironic that flowers, symbols of passionate love, were flowing from the eyes of a goddess wounded by love. Zeus's gaze passed over her, casting toward the flash of lightning outside the pantheon, as if the hysterical goddess before him, and all the painful entanglements she represented, were merely an insignificant interlude in his eternal reign. When Hera's sobbing gradually ceased. Your power comes from the authority you share with me, Hera. You share half of the king of the gods, authority and glory, he said slowly, his voice devoid of any ripples. Starting from Uranus, no other god queen has held half the authority of the king of the gods. You have enjoyed the glory, so you must bear its weight. As for offspring, I have already given you enough chances. The children you have birthed are weak and not worth nurturing. You don't think that the crisis of my reign as king of the gods comes solely from that ethereal prophecy, do you? Zeus's voice was not loud, yet it rolled through the pantheon like thunder, stirring up ripples. If things continue like this, I fear that before the prophecy is fulfilled, we will be torn apart and devoured by those wolves eyeing us hungrily. Noble peacocks and eagles are no match for packs of tigers and leopards, Zeus said loudly, spreading his arms and staring at Hera. Zeus continued loudly, you only see me uniting with Leto to give birth to Artemis and Apollo, but you fail to see that Leto's mother is the ancient moon goddess Phoebe, and her father is the titan Koios, who governs wisdom and darkness. These two deities are merely sleeping, not locked away in Tartarus. You only see Athena born from my mind, but you do not know that the wounds of Tethys, mother of all waters, are nearly healed. Her awakening requires a counterbalance, she needs a dawn to heal the Oceanus that encircles the world. You only see me letting Maia give birth to Hermes, but you do not know that her father is the sky-supporting titan Atlas, and her mother is Pleione, daughter of the ocean currents. Zeus stared coldly at Hera. Behind every child stands the ancient power of their father's generation. He stood up and walked toward Hera step by step. Do you think I am just wantonly breeding offspring? I have given you countless chances to mend your divinity. Zeus said. Didn't those human women who bore my offspring greatly alleviate your wounds? Zeus said. Then why unite with sister Demeter? Hera had calmed down by now, and she understood what Zeus meant. Zeus said softly, although she is very weak, she is also your sister and mine, and furthermore, she is the only deity in this world who still possesses the authority of healing and is someone we can reach. Among the deities possessing healing powers, there are only three primary ones. The first is Gaia, the second is Krios, god of growth, and the third is Demeter, goddess of agriculture. Neither of the first two are deities Zeus can reach. Do you remember the fate of the previous titan Koios? Zeus asked. Hera's pupils constricted, as if she realized something. I let her give birth to offspring not just to protect and shelter her, but to use that newborn child to consolidate my rule. No matter what that child becomes, they will surely inherit this power. Hera listened in a daze, as if she had returned to the moment she was born. She remembered the days of being swallowed into her father Cronus's stomach, that was boundless darkness, suffocation, and despair. It was Zeus who brought her back to the light. From that moment on, that figure was branded into her soul, and her love and longing grew wildly like vines. She thought marriage was an eternal vow, a destination he had given her, but what she got in return was the pain of her divinity being torn apart time and time again. She understood everything Zeus said, but she did not understand why Zeus had to be so obsessed with the position of king of the gods. With his level of greater divine power, the throne was merely icing on the cake. But why did he have to sit in this position? Willing to bear betrayal and schemes, just to hold tightly to this double-edged scepter. Hera was silent for a long time, and finally, she slowly straightened her body, and the expression on her face finally became natural again. Alright, let's go. Zeus reached out, using his divine power to gently wipe away the tear stains on her face and smooth out every wrinkle in her robe. Those eyes, blue as the firmament, looked at her once again, as if holding the depth and tranquility of the entire world. Hera's heart trembled, and the surging pain miraculously subsided. Her love fell once again into those blue pupils. The council of all gods is about to begin. A faint curve appeared on the corners of Zeus's lips. This time, I fear it will be very lively. After all, this is the time for Soraphine's first appearance. Zeus took Hera's hand and walked slowly toward the pantheon. They had once again become synonymous with nobility. By now, the pantheon was already filled with deities, but they were there chattering, arguing, and conversing. Leaning or lying down, chatting and laughing, there was none of the solemnity that an assembly should have. This made Sorafine feel extremely strange, but he did not say anything. Instead, he entered quietly, scanned the room with his gaze, and quickly found the figure of his mother, Demeter. Just as he was about to walk over, the sound in the entire great hall suddenly went quiet. Countless gazes fell upon him simultaneously, curious, scrutinizing, astonished, inquisitive. The gazes of the deities were almost tangible, and the air seemed to solidify at this moment. Is that the god of seeds? Sorafine, a deity of faint divine power, asked his companion beside him in a low voice, his tone full of disbelief. Is he really a deity born within this millennium? Why, is his level already at the peak of faint divine power? The deity of occurrence next to him was equally shaken. That's right, it is indeed the peak. How is this possible? Whispers spread like ripples. A millennium is but an instant to the gods. Yet in this very instant, this god of seeds had actually reached the pinnacle of faint divine power. What miraculous speed this is! None of the deities present had reached this level without millions of years of time, or unless they had ascended due to the blessings of heaven and earth. An existence like Sorafine had long since exceeded common reason. Sorafine walked steadily forward amidst countless gazes and arrived at the side of his mother, Demeter. Demeter revealed a feigned reproachful expression and said, "My lovely child, how do you have time to accompany this poor old mother of yours? I have been waiting for you on Olympus for so many years." Sorafine looked at Demeter, goddess of agriculture, with a hint of embarrassment and whispered, "Mother, please forgive me. I was so engrossed in fulfilling my priesthood that I forgot to tell you." Upon hearing this, Demeter, goddess of agriculture, breathed a gentle sigh of relief, a tender smile appearing on her face. "My dear child, it is all right. Be more careful next time, but do not push yourself so hard. You should enjoy life occasionally. Remember, your mother is one of the 12 main gods of Olympus, Demeter, goddess of agriculture. Any deity who wishes to harm you must first step over my divine body." As she spoke, her gaze slowly swept across the surroundings, carrying an undisguised warning. Sorafine felt a warmth in his heart. He understood that Demeter's words were not only a protection for him but also a declaration of his value to the gods on a day like the Council of All Gods. If anyone dared to touch him, they would have to face the wrath of a main god. This deterrence was enough to make most gods hesitant to act. Indeed, the noisy whispers in the hall gradually subsided. Just then, King Zeus walked into the hall holding the hand of the god queen, Hera, interrupting the standoff between the gods and Demeter. He walked up the steps, step by step, and finally sat on the throne of the god king. His gaze swept over the gods, conveying a routine inquiry. Another millennium has passed, and the Council of All Gods has convened. Do the gods have anything that needs to be said? Has anyone suffered harm from mortals? Or if there are matters in your hearts that you are unwilling to accept, you may all speak out and let the world know our grievances. The hall was silent for a moment. These gods were accustomed to acting as they pleased. They were the only ones who provoked all living things. How could any living creature dare to offend their majesty? Even if there were conflicts, they were mostly caused by demigods, and behind them usually stood a powerful father or mother. Bringing it up at the Council of All Gods would only result in a warning, not a complete resolution. Just as Zeus was preparing to leave, suddenly, the sun god, Helios, stood up. His golden red hair flowed like solar flames, and his orange-red pupils flashed with undisguised ambition and greed. "King Zeus," he said loudly, "every day, my sister, the moon goddess Selene, and I drive the sun chariot and the moon chariot, bringing light and tranquility to the world. This is a very important matter for the world. The flowers, plants, and trees on the earth receive the sun's illumination, thus growing vigorously. Yet, despite this contribution, we have not received the glory that matches it." Zeus's eyebrows twitched slightly, and a faint smile appeared on his lips. It had begun. He had thought this drama would occur at the next Council of All Gods. Although he thought this in his heart, Zeus's tone remained very steady. "Then, Helios, what do you want? Do you want divine artifacts? Or do you want the faith of the humans on earth?" "Neither. Selene and I should become two of the 12 main gods." Helios lifted his chin, his tone confident. "With our power and our contributions, are we inferior to some gods who sit in the position of a main god but possess mediocre strength and divine power levels?" Although he did not name names, the gazes of all the gods turned unanimously toward Demeter, goddess of agriculture. After all, before Sorafine was born, Demeter, goddess of agriculture, was merely a deity of occurrence. How could such a deity occupy the position of a main god? It was only by relying on the forceful recommendation of Zeus and Hera that she sat there. Therefore, in the minds of most gods, Demeter, goddess of agriculture, was a main god in name only. Soraphine's eyes turned cold. He understood what the other gods were thinking. They did not worry about scarcity but about inequality. They did not worry about poverty but about instability. This act by Helios was clearly an attempt to attack Zeus's injustice by belittling the fact that his mother lacked the strength to occupy the main god position, and he wanted to ascend to the position of a main god by stepping on Demeter, goddess of agriculture. How could Soraphine have any favorable feelings toward Helios? He was not a saint who prioritized principles over family. If Helios wanted to use his mother to climb up, he had to be prepared to be pricked by a hedgehog. Aphrodite, the goddess of love and beauty, lightly covered her red lips and glanced smilingly at Demeter, goddess of agriculture and Soraphine, her eyes swirling with unfathomable thoughts, seemingly curious as to why Demeter, goddess of agriculture and Soraphine had not yet moved to mock this sun god. Selene, the moon goddess, also glanced at Soraphine. Looking at Soraphine, who was bowing his head in thought, although she felt that her brother's actions were inappropriate, she did not want to speak up to dissuade him or give Demeter, goddess of agriculture, a way out. In her view, she was just a goddess of agriculture. Although she possessed a unique healing power, it was not a necessary power for them, the twin gods of the sun and moon. They rose in the east and set in the west every day, bringing light and clear radiance to the world, accumulating vast favor from the world. As long as they did not take actions to destroy the world, this favor would never dissipate, and it was precisely because of this that they dared to be so ostentatious. After all, they were not fools. Why would they give up being a proper sun god and moon goddess to destroy the world and personally shatter the protective barrier upon themselves? Zeus laughed softly. Helios, he said slowly, the brilliance of the sun certainly nourishes all things, but for gods, it is not an indispensable thing. It is like my thunder. Is your sun just a toy in front of thunder? And war, can your brilliance influence the outcome of a war? He paused, his gaze turning to the muscular man in the hall. You cannot even defeat my son, Ares, so how can you be worthy of the position of a main god? Upon hearing this, Ares immediately puffed out his chest, his face full of pride. He did not expect that his father, who had always looked down on him, would actually praise him. But the god queen, Hera, frowned. It was clear that Zeus was using Ares as a pawn to oppose Helios. Yet her simple-minded and warlike child was actually smug about it. Hera was very worried. Ares held the authority of war, but he only knew war and lacked wisdom and strategy. Such a god would not be able to stay in Olympus for long. He needed a wife who could complement him, a goddess who could bring victory, glory, or wisdom. Suddenly, her eyes flashed, and her gaze quietly shifted to the goddess in the second seat to Zeus's left. That was the goddess born from Zeus's mind, named Athena, who held the authority of strategy. Although Athena had not become a main god, she possessed strength that was not inferior to some main gods. Moreover, her divine power level had already reached the peak of occurrence, just one step away from medium divine power. Although she had been at the occurrence level since her birth, it had only taken her 100,000 years to reach the peak of occurrence. Her talent and strength were already not inferior to the son of her sister, Demeter, goddess of agriculture. Thinking of this, Hera's eyes deepened, and she had already begun to plan how to make Ares and Athena marry. Ha! 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 Just at that moment, Helios drew the attention of all the gods, and even Hera stopped her musings. Helios was somewhat dissatisfied seeing the silent Zeus, so he turned the topic back to Demeter, goddess of agriculture. Oh. My dear Demeter, goddess of agriculture, some gods are simply not worthy of sitting in the position of a main god. I wonder, do you agree with me or not? All gazes in the pantheon instantly converged on Demeter. Demeter's face turned livid, her hands clenched tightly, and her teeth ground together with a chattering sound. Helios's words were clearly meant to roast her over a fire. He was openly mocking her right to her face. He didn't hold her in any regard at all. Helios sneered. He wanted to make it crystal clear to all the gods, if even Demeter could be a main god, why couldn't he, Helios? Just then, Soraphine suddenly chuckled, stepped forward, looked up at Helios, and said, Lord Helios, not all gods in this world have to compete over who is better at fighting, nor is every main god's position dependent on combat power. If that were the case, the world would be in total chaos. Every god has their own unique power. The sun is indeed powerful and brings light and warmth to all things, but unfortunately. Soraphine shook his head with a tisk-tisk sound. Its master is an arrogant, hot-tempered, and inconsiderate god who never understands how to empathize with others. If such a god were allowed to sit in the position of a main god, the ordinary, weak gods living in Olympus would likely be bullied into dust and turned into ash under your solar flames. Sorophine took the opportunity to stir up the emotions of those weaker gods. That's right. Some of the weaker gods realized. If Helios were to take the position of a main god, what would happen to us? Helios is already so arrogant now, if he were to become a main god, wouldn't he be even more insufferable? Helios exploded on the spot. What nonsense are you spouting? You ridiculous Sorophine, son of Demeter. I bring light and heat to the world, shouldn't you be thanking me? How dare you accuse me? Don't forget, your power of seed, those plants, they all grow thanks to my light. Without me, what are you? Merely a pathetic god who could be replaced at any moment. Sorophine smiled. The more arrogant Helios acted, the deeper the impression he would leave on those weaker gods. However, he still needed to provide a solution for plants losing light. After all, without light, plants truly had no way to grow. It was time to bring it out. The timing was perfect. So, he raised a hand, and the divine artifact, the seed of the world tree, continued to exert its effect. Soon, a strange object appeared in his palm. The top half was grayish, and the bottom half resembled a white stalk. It had no leaves, and the top looked like a flat, round hat, with thin, flake-like structures along the edges. It looked like a miniature, crude little temple. Lord Helios, since you say that plants can only live by relying on the sun, then I shall create a plant that does not need the sun. Sorophine said, slapping him in the face with his words. Sorophine held the object, and under the witness of the gods, he spoke to the world. It is called a mushroom. It does not need to bask in the sun, it only needs a little moisture to grow. Furthermore, it can turn dead branches and fallen leaves on the ground into nutrients, nourishing the earth in return. After saying this, Sorophine used his divine power to manifest the mushroom from a concept into reality. As his voice faded, clusters of grayish-white, fresh mushrooms actually sprouted from the floor of the pantheon. This scene even disturbed Gaia, who had been in slumber. She gently opened her eyes and smiled. Oh my, what a lovely god, to actually be able to save me some divine power. I had thought that dead leaves could only be annihilated by the world. I never expected they could turn into fertilizer to nourish other plants. Not bad, Sorophine. Gaia murmured, contributing her own influence to the birth of this new plant species by Sorophine. The next moment, the world law descended, and the mushroom was officially recognized. It could decompose dead branches and fallen leaves, become fertilizer for the earth after death, and did not require light. This meant that mushrooms could even grow in the dark underground and in caves. The living space for life was expanded, and the entire ecosystem became richer and more robust. Once the mushroom appeared and a new ecological chain emerged, Sorophine could rely on the mushroom to win over a group of gods who had become stronger because of it. Helios's face turned green. He had not expected Sorophine to actually have a solution, but he still stubbornly retorted, a mushroom. A mushy, soft thing, what else can it do besides being eaten? Ridiculous. Do you think this can hurt me? Let me tell you, it is plants that cannot live without the sun, not the sun that cannot live without plants. Without the sun, all plants will wither and die. Sorophine actually nodded. You are right, without the sun, plants will indeed die. That is why I created the mushroom. His gaze was calm. If you were to truly withdraw the sunlight, the plants on the ground would eventually wither, but I could still rely on the mushroom to decompose them into nutrients, returning them to the earth and nourishing Gaia. Was I wrong to create the mushroom? Helios's face shifted from green to blue, then to red, like a painter's palette. What could he say? Could he argue that Sorophine shouldn't have created such a plant, or that he shouldn't have helped Gaia? His best response now was silence, because no matter what he said, he was certain that the Sorophine before him would inevitably steer the conversation back to Gaia. Although he was powerful and indulgent, he was not brainless. If he offended Gaia, did he think he would still be able to live? In truth, in Sorophine's past life, the mushroom would have been considered a fungus, but since it was created by Sorophine, for now, it was considered a plant in the eyes of the world. However, perhaps as time passed, it might eventually become an independent new category of its own. Well, Lord Helios, do you have anything to say? Sorophine smiled slightly. Beside him, Demeter signaled for Sorophine to stop. They had already gained the upper hand, and there was no need to further provoke Helios. Helios was so angry his face twisted. Fine, fine, fine. So that's how you want to play, is it? Useless mushroom, I curse it. He loudly proclaimed. Any mushroom that touches strong sunlight shall wither, turn white, and dry up to its death, and furthermore, it shall never be able to produce seed. Selene, the moon goddess, also frowned, feeling that they shouldn't go to such extremes. However, since her brother had already made his decision, she had to follow suit and nip this potential threat of retaliation in the bud, so she added, under the light of the moon, no mushroom shall be able to produce seed either. The two gods looked at each other and said in unison, as long as the sun and moon remain, the mushroom can only be brought forth by divine power and shall never be able to propagate naturally. Unless the god of seeds possesses divine power that surpasses ours. For a god of seeds, having the plants he created be unable to produce seed was a humiliation of the highest order. Helios and Selene wanted to show the whole world the consequences of provoking the sun and the moon. If Sorophine had just endured it, they wouldn't have been so ruthless, but who told him to insist on standing up for his mother? Having offended them, did he expect to get away unscathed? The sun god Helios wore a triumphant smile. In his eyes, Sorophine was nothing more than a new god, born less than a millennium ago, who dared to show off before the gods and even used Gaia to slap him in the face. It was simply overestimating his own capabilities. The current situation was exactly what he deserved. As he finished speaking, a ripple of snickers echoed through the hall. The gods' gazes, filled with sarcasm or mockery, were like invisible arrows, all cast toward the young god standing beside Demeter. With a face full of worry, Demeter quietly tugged at her son's robe and whispered persuasively, my dear Sorophine, why not? Let the mushroom share the reproductive method of wheat. It is the only way for now. Let a mushroom randomly grow within every grain of wheat. This method would undoubtedly weaken her own divine power and might even cause chaos in the order of species. If it caused serious consequences, it could even lead to Demeter being punished by the world, but the goddess of agriculture, deeply loving her son, could no longer care about that. The mushroom was the first plant that Sorophine had created alone. One must know that the first held special significance for every deity, and if it were destroyed, his potential would certainly decrease. Hephaestus had participated in the peach tree, so strictly speaking, it did not count as the first plant. Sorophine, however, shook his head gently, staring at the mushroom in his hand, having already found a solution in his heart. He comforted Demeter, saying, Mother, there is no need for that. I already have a solution, we don't need to go that far. Such a method would not only damage your origin but also disrupt the laws of the world, making the world despise you. It would prevent you from advancing any further. Just as Demeter wanted to say something more, Sorophine raised his eyes to look at Helios and Selene, who were sitting on their thrones with arrogant expressions, and a curve, almost tender, slowly lifted the corners of his mouth. He raised the mushroom, his voice echoing clearly through the pantheon. The power of the mushroom originates from the earth and nourishes the world. Then, why can its method of reproduction not return to the heavens and the earth? Sorophine opened his palm as if holding an invisible breeze and spoke loudly, I shall grant it avatars as small as dust, invisible to the eye. I call them spores. Every mature mushroom will release thousands upon thousands of spores, scattering with the wind into the vast world. Most spores may perish while drifting, scorched by the blazing sun or chilled by the moonlight, but there will always be some that luckily land on suitable soil and germinate into entirely new life. As soon as his words were spoken, an unprecedented fluctuation of laws quietly rippled outward. The priesthood of the mushroom, which had been blocked by the curse of the sun and moon, unexpectedly used this new reproductive method, spore reproduction, as a bridge to recondense and take form. This priesthood bypassed the curse set by Helios and Selene, just like a vine finding a gap to grow, and took firm root within the laws of the world. The trace of triumph that had not yet faded from Helios's face suddenly froze. He stared at Sorophine in disbelief, golden flames dancing in his eyes as if he wanted to burn Sorophine to ashes. Beside him, the moon goddess Selene felt her heart sink, and a sense of foreboding swept over her like a cold tide. Had she done something wrong? She should not have forced such a god, who seemed weak but contained inconceivable power, for the sake of a little benefit. She clenched her fists in secret, forcing herself to stay calm. No, no, no. It's impossible. We, brother and sister, hold dominion over the rising and setting of the sun and moon. The world's favor is profound. Even Zeus must maintain superficial respect for us, let alone a newly born god. But this self-consolation was completely shattered in the next second. The radiance of the priesthood of the mushroom and spores, like fireflies finding their home, poured into Sorophine's body. The gentle divine light around him suddenly surged, and that invisible barrier blocking his path from faint divine power to occurrence, actually emitted a crisp cracking sound. It was pierced through just like a sheet of paper. His divine pressure unfolded within the pantheon. Standing in the pantheon, Seraphine was already a true god of occurrence. This is impossible. A god exclaimed in shock, he is not even 1,000 years old, the trials of the world's laws haven't even begun. How could he advance so easily? How can there be such a god? Why does the world favor him so much? Does this mere power of spores make the world favor this newly born god? Another voice, filled with confusion and horror, said while watching the advancing Seraphine. Helios's complexion became extremely ugly. Seraphine's advancement was completely illogical, unless, his understanding and creation of authority had long since far exceeded the limits that his current godhood could contain. It was like a third-grade elementary student winning the first prize in an Olympiad math competition and then being promoted directly to middle school. Not only was there no exam, but the principal even politely invited him to the middle school church. The worried look on Demeter's face was swept away, and a glow of pride and joy welled up in her eyes. She held Seraphine's hand and turned to face Helios, her voice gentle but filled with the pleasure of vindication. My dear child, Seraphine will only bring more power to the world. Unlike some gods, who only know how to flaunt their power by inheriting their father's authority and bully other gods. This veiled sarcasm made the true sun fire around Helios flare up violently. He laughed in extreme anger and said grimly, you are just a goddess of agriculture who clings to Zeus, what are you proud of? Be careful that one day, while walking on the earth, you aren't abducted by some blind thing and treated as a slave, that would be interesting. After all, it's not as if no god has ever been captured and enslaved by lowly mortals. Helios continued to mock, and I don't know which slut gave birth to the fool Seraphine. His father must have died long ago, right? Hearing this, Hera was stunned. She glanced at Zeus, then at Demeter, not knowing what she was thinking. And Zeus, who was beside her, was even more direct. With a cold snort, intense pressure suppressed Helios, and he stared at Helios with cold eyes. Helios, shut up. Helios's back was bent by this sudden pressure. Helios closed his mouth, but after seeing Seraphine escape, being mocked by Demeter, and being suppressed by Zeus, the anger in his heart could no longer be contained. In his rage, his divine power went out of control, and several sparks of violent true sun fire splashed out from him, landing right on a nymph who was serving nearby. The poor nymph let out a shrill scream. Fortunately, it was only a spark, so she could still scream, but unfortunately, none of the gods present had a way to deal with the solar flames, so she could only scream in agony. Most of the gods in the hall were indifferent to this scene. After all, in their eyes, nymphs were not of their kind, and they were accustomed to such slaughter. Only a hint of pity flashed in Demeter's eyes, but she had no way to stop the extremely young and extremely fierce flames. Her power was countered by Helios. She could only hold Seraphine's hand tighter, as if to convey strength and also to draw support from it. At this moment, Seraphine, who had just stabilized his occurrence, opened his eyes. His gaze fell upon the nymph who was being burned by the sun god's true fire and screaming in agony. She curled up on the ground, her body wrapped in scorching golden flames, like a candlewick about to burn out. Seraphine's eyes narrowed. Looking at the sparks of the sun god's flames still burning, a plan to retaliate against Helios formed in his mind. Subsequently, he raised his hand, and biting cold air surged from his palm. Ice and snow priesthood activated. Then, pieces of crystal clear cold ice condensed out of thin air, carrying a bone-chilling coldness, and were thrown one after another at the burning figure. Immediately after, more ice and snow gathered, turning into a small, localized snowstorm that completely enveloped the nymph. Ice and fire clashed fiercely, emitting harsh sizzling sounds, and a large amount of steaming white mist diffused, forming thick fog. Under the continuous suppression of the power of ice, those arrogant solar flames finally flickered and unwillingly extinguished. Looking at the nymph he had saved, Seraphine had not yet had time to relax when he felt a scorching gaze that almost pierced through him. Helios's anger was not diminished by the extinguishing of the flames. Instead, it was like a raging fire doused with oil, burning fiercely. Zeus's previous suppression had already made him feel stifled, and now Seraphine's meddling had completely ignited the anger in his heart. Do you insist on going against me, Seraphine? Helios gritted his teeth, staring at Seraphine, saying word by word, a lowly nymph, if she dies, she dies. You actually offend my majesty again and again for such an ant. You must think clearly about what the consequences will be if you make an enemy of me. Do you want to reach the point of fighting to the death with me? He took a step forward, the divine light around him surging, and the temperature in the pantheon suddenly rose, as if they were in the middle of the sun. Don't forget your most fundamental authority of seeds. If not for my sunlight shining upon it, how would the seed on the earth sprout and grow? If I wanted to, I could make all the seed wither at any time, rendering your power void. Facing this naked threat, Soraphine's actions did not pause in the slightest, instead, they became faster. More and thicker ice covered the nymph's battered body, desperately resisting the bone-deep solar embers. When the last piece of ice turned into a protective water vapor barrier, the nymph's life was finally saved. It was a pity that her originally beautiful face and body were unrecognizable, her hair was completely destroyed, and her skin was covered with hideous, twisted charred scars, like a statue wantonly destroyed by the clumsiest craftsman. Although the solar flames had been extinguished, a trace of solar power remained in her body like a maggot in the bone, constantly jumping under the ice layer, ready to reignite at any time. Soraphine frowned, realizing he had still underestimated the terror of the sun god's authority. As long as Helios existed, even the slightest sparks he scattered would almost never go out. This flame could not be eliminated by the power of ice and snow at all. He could only maintain the freezing most of the nymph's body, leaving only her head exposed to breathe with difficulty, suppressing the reignition of the solar flames. Did you hear me, Soraphine? Stop your divine power. Helios's roar shook the pillars of the hall. Only then did Soraphine slowly raise his eyes to look at the furious sun god, a cold sneer curling at the corner of his mouth. Stop. From the moment you insulted my mother Demeter, there was no room left between us. Fighting to the death. You were right. Good. Good. A good fight to the death. Helios laughed out of extreme anger, the golden light blinding. I want to see what you and your cowardly mother, who only knows how to tinker with crops, can do to me. Healing. Hey, in the face of absolute power, it is nothing but a trick to prolong one's life. Is that so? Soraphine's voice was abnormally calm, yet like cold ice. Then I sincerely hope that the noble sun god will never have a day where he needs this trick. Otherwise, today's contempt you have shown for me and my mother will be returned to you in full in the future. This seemingly powerless counterattack made Helios feel that Soraphine was at the end of his rope and could only speak empty words. The anger in his heart subsided slightly, turning into deeper arrogance and mockery. Ha! 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 Ridiculous. I, Helios, the master of the sun, drive the sun chariot every day to bring light to the world. The favor of the world I carry is something even Zeus has to weigh. Who can hurt me? Who dares to hurt me? Soraphine, just take your useless healing power and these lowly creations and fall into the abyss of Tartarus together. The gods there might welcome your favor. Looking at Helios's rampant and unscrupulous appearance, a cold light flashed in Soraphine's eyes. Helios, very good, I hope you can always be so arrogant. And protect your child Phaethon well. That hero, from his past life who legend says tried to drive the sun chariot and caused a disaster of heavenly fire. If he were to lose control while driving the sun chariot in the sky, what would Helios's ending be? Soraphine's gaze inadvertently swept over Zeus's position, only to see Zeus supporting his chin, watching Helios with an expressionless face. His eyes were cold, and there was nothing else in his gaze toward Helios, as if he were looking at a dead god. Just at this moment, the moon goddess Selene, who had been watching the changes, rose from her silver bright throne, walked down the steps, and stood beside her brother Helios. She shared interests and honor with the sun god, having stood side by side for countless years had long made them inseparable. Selene elegantly lifted her chin, her cold, moon-like gaze falling on Soraphine, her voice flowing like moonlight, yet carrying high and mighty arrogance, saying, Dear Soraphine, being young and vigorous is understandable, but you also need to consider yourself and your mother Demeter. She paused, her eyes secretly sweeping over Zeus. She had a guess in her heart about Soraphine's origin. After all, when her brother mentioned that sentence, Zeus's ambiguous attitude made her heart tighten. If Soraphine was really Zeus's child, then it would be better to try to resolve the conflict. However, long-standing arrogance ultimately prevailed, and she continued, Why don't we both take a step back? You give up guarding that insignificant nymph and apologize to me and Helios, and this matter will pass. We might be able to become friends. In her view, this was already a great tolerance and favor to Soraphine. Hearing this, Soraphine actually laughed lowly, the mockery in his laughter undisguised. He looked directly into Celine's beautiful moon-like eyes, and said word by word, clearly and unambiguously. Take your noble apology proposal and go eat human excrement. What did you say? Celine's flawless face instantly stiffened, as if she could not believe her ears. Moonlight fluctuated violently around her. Sorafine raised his voice to ensure every god in the hall could hear clearly. I said, let you, the noble moon goddess, take your conditions and go eat shit. Boom. Celine's heart felt as if it had been bombed by a nuclear weapon. Her face flushed like a ripe peach, gritting her teeth. The last bit of hesitation in her heart caused by concerns about Zeus was completely burned away by Sorafine's unprecedented, extremely vulgar, and direct insult. The flames of shame and rage rushed into her eyes, and the silver divine light became sharp and dangerous. The opportunity she had bestowed upon Sorafine had been trampled upon like this. Since becoming the moon goddess, she had never been insulted like this. Sorafine. Celine's teeth gnashed together, and the crisp sound of grinding teeth seemed particularly harsh in the silent pantheon. The air seemed to have solidified, thick enough to be suffocating, with only the faint breathing of the serving nymphs visible to the eye. The gods present held their breath, yet their eyes grew brighter one by one. In their long divine lives, repetitive pleasures and power struggles had long since left them bored. This unexpected conflict was like a boulder thrown into a still pool, stirring up a sense of delight and excitement within them. Sun god Helios and moon goddess Selene vs the newly ascended occurrence Sorafine and the main deity of Olympus, goddess of agriculture Demeter. Who would win? What a heart-stirring, exciting drama. However, the gazes of some gods shifted subtly between Sorafine's handsome face and Selene's graceful figure, secretly muttering to themselves. Hopefully, as they fight, it won't evolve into a tangled web of love and hate. That would be boring. Selene finally squeezed the words out through her teeth, moonlight surging violently around her, emitting a cold, bone-chilling rage. Sorafine. It seems your time of birth is still too short, so short that you haven't yet learned what humility is, or what awe for powerful gods is. Let me teach you what awe is. After speaking, a powerful divine pressure enveloped Sorafine. Meanwhile, Demeter's face was filled with worry. She gripped the wheat ears in her hand tightly, her knuckles turning white. She was only a god of medium divine power, and a healing-type god at that, with no way to contend with the twins Helios and Selene. What to do? What to do? Suddenly, Demeter seemed to think of something and subconsciously looked at her sister, Hestia, hoping Hestia would extend a helping hand. Unfortunately, Hestia made no move, only a trace of guilt flashing in her eyes. Hestia pinched the torch in her hand, not daring to look at Demeter, thinking to herself, I'm sorry, Demeter, I need to maintain the stability of the family. I cannot help you, because it would let Hera notice. And ultimately destroy the stability of the family. However, Sorafine, at the center of the storm, was unusually calm. He even took half a step forward against Selene's divine pressure, a faint light flashing in his hand, revealing a long-handled scythe with a primitive design and an entirely pitch-black body. Selene, look at what this is. Sorafine was not coerced by Selene's pressure, instead, he showed a trace of mockery. Selene's pupils contracted sharply, and then she let out an undisguised sneer, the Blackstone scythe. So what? She lifted her chin, her posture arrogant. It's just the Blackstone scythe. A divine artifact may be powerful, but that doesn't mean its owner is. A god of occurrence dares to provoke a god of medium divine power. I hope you can still maintain this firmness under the gaze of the moonlight. Are you trying to say that one is not powerful? I am not worthy of such a noble divine artifact as the Blackstone scythe. Sorafine gently stroked the blade of the Blackstone scythe, looking at Selene with mockery. Selene's face turned ugly, as if she had been choked by a large steamed bun. What a cunning god. TCH, I hope your strength is as hard as your mouth. Selene could only spit out this sentence, which seemed like a threat but sounded like coquetry. Sorafine rolled his eyes. Baby, do you know that when you scold people, it sounds like you're flirting? And Aphrodite, the goddess of love and beauty sitting in the main deity's seat, felt a sense of fear rise in her heart for no reason when she heard the words, Blackstone scythe. Her stunning face instantly lost its color, as if she had seen something terrifying. However, Aphrodite quickly adjusted herself, a flash of strangeness crossing her face. What was wrong with her? Why would she have such thoughts? At the same time, Selene's face turned ugly. At this moment, Sorafine also realized, so he added, Your Highness, to the conversation and continued, Your Highness Selene, the origin of the moon does not belong to you, does it? When I was performing my priesthood on the earth, I accidentally learned the name of a goddess, Her Highness the Moon Goddess Phoebe. She was born during the era of the first generation God King, and as far as I know, you were born during the reign of the second generation God King. Once these words were spoken, in the corner of the temple, a goddess draped in star gauze with a calm temperament suddenly clenched her fists, her nails digging deep into her palms. She was Leto, the mother of the light god Apollo and the hunting goddess Artemis. The gaze she directed at Selene burned with grief and indignation suppressed for countless years. The obsession she had finally managed to let go of was now recalled. According to common sense, normal parents would leave their wealth to their children, unless the child was too much of a loser. However, Leto had never betrayed her parents, nor was she an unintelligent god. But why did the authority of the moon eventually fall into Selene's hands? And it was the core power that had the greatest impact on her own authority. No god would easily hand over the core power derived from their own concept to a foreign god with no blood relationship, rather than to their own loyal descendants. Even if Sorafine mastered so many origins, he would not dare to teach part of that power to a strange god. What if he got backstabbed? Selene felt nothing from Leto's gaze, or rather, she was already used to it. The mocking expression on her face grew stronger, and she said disdainfully, "Poor and ignorant new god. You can't even distinguish between the origins of divine positions. It is true that the incarnation of the original concept of the moon is Her Highness Phoebe, but the origin I master is the origin of the moon's form and radiance. The moon hangs in the night sky, casting its clear radiance. This is my symbol. If I were to perish, the moon in the sky would disappear. Although the concept of the moon would still exist, even if Her Highness Phoebe were to revive, she would have no way to recast the physical moon. You use this to threaten me. Have you asked the will of the world?" Her words were resounding, displaying her authority to the gods and causing other doubtful gods to abandon the idea of seizing her authority. Although she did not think much of the weak god Sorafine, she had to admire his wisdom. Other gods would surely have thought of the same question he raised. Since that was the case, she directly pointed out the differences between her authority and Phoebe's, which would dispel the thoughts of gods wanting to seize her authority. After all, she was the master of the moon's origin. As long as she did not destroy the world, no god could take away her moon origin. Faint discussions sounded around, like the low humming of a swarm of bees. Even so, that Leto. Shish, shish, shish. Do you not want your life? These ancient matters are not for us newly born gods to discuss. But this Sorafine, his guts are too big, he actually dared to directly expose this layer. Sorafine frowned slightly, then relaxed again. So that's how it is. Sorafine's voice suddenly turned cold, then shifted to a smile. That is truly wonderful. That's the end of part 2. Part 3 is coming soon.
Thanks for watching. Please subscribe and support our channel for more stories.